everybody. I'm Patty Raun. I'm the director of the Center for Communicating Science at Virginia Tech. And it is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker for Science on Tap. Dr. Bruce Hull is a longtime colleague and a lifelong friend. His focus on sustainable development in the face of converging demographic, environmental, governance, and market transformations has changed the way a lot of us have thought about sustainability. He finds ways that inevitable change might lead to a bountiful and balanced future. And that's a pretty inspirational view. He's a senior fellow in the Center for Leadership in Global Sustainability, a leader in the Global Change Center, and among many other roles he plays in organizations across the nation. He is a valued member of the advisory committee for the Center for Communicating Science. Bruce uses his social science and leadership training experiences to teach collaborative, interdisciplinary team science skills and how to be effective in science policy interfaces. But I would say among the most important things that he teaches or inspires, I guess, is a sense of confidence in his students and in his colleagues. And I can say from firsthand experience that without Bruce's inspiration, I would never have had the confidence to take the risks that I have had in my career over the last 10 years around the issues of communicating science. So it is my deep privilege to share his experience and his light with you all. And here is Dr. Bruce Hull.
Sustainability requires hope and leadership. We already have the technology, we have the regulations, we have the government agencies, we have the market fixes, we have pretty much everything we need to sustain development. What we lack are leadership and hope. In this short podcast, I want to explain what I mean. I want to divide this podcast up into three parts. First, I want to help you envision the future. I want to see what you think the future is, and I want to then share with you a couple different visions of the future. Then I want to explain how leadership and hope can get us to some of the desired future conditions. And then finally, I want to end with a few examples of why I am hopeful. So let me begin with a couple polls here. Let me get my head out of the way. Can you answer these questions for me? What do you think the global percentage of people who are literate are, right? How the global percentage of people can read and write. If you want a little bit more time, go ahead and hit pause. Next question is a little bit more complicated. In what year will there be fewer people in poverty and extreme poverty and more people in middle class and wealthy? That is, when will we reach that tipping point to move from the mostly poor to mostly middle class? In what year do you think that will happen? Again, pause if you need a little bit more time. And then the third question, I'm going to return to all three of these, is do you think that we're on course to trigger some sort of ecological collapse that will cause serious challenges for human civilization? Do you agree with this? Do you think this statement is true, or do you disagree, or do you think it's false? All right, so there are two future conditions here that I want to present. These are definitely extreme versions. There are many possible futures. These two represent illustrations that I'm going to come back to over and over again. What future do you use to motivate you to get out of bed in the morning? I mean, what future do you want to be a part of? Do you want to contribute to? Or maybe which future keeps you in bed in the morning because you're feeling helpless and hopeless? Or maybe even which future wakes you up at night because you're worried that it might happen. Which future do you use to connect the dots of the facts that you know about the world, where you think we're heading? What's the major narrative or story you use to explain yourself to others, to explain the way the world is and the way it's heading? these two different futures here, the decline versus the breakthrough, are extremely different in how they engage people, right? And they're one is hopeful. The hopeful story is the breakthrough, and the other is the pessimistic, the decline. And I'm going to return again and again to the power of story in terms of organizing the way we think about the future and engaging others in the practice, in the hard work there is of creating that future. First, let me admit that we've got some serious problems, including that my head's gotten a little foggy. Let me see if I can clear that up. There we go. What are the future we're heading to is clearly accelerating. We're moving fast towards this future. You can kind of feel it already. And in pretty much any indicator you select, whether it's a physical indicator about the environment or a indicator about social conditions, they're all accelerating. They're all arcing upward somewhere around 1950 or so. And this is the Great Acceleration Project that sort of catalogs that information. And this is not projections. This is actual data. So let me just give you a few of these. There's urban population is increasing. The amount of energy we're using is increasing. The amount of water we're using is increasing. The amount of fertilizer we're using is increasing. The amount of transportation is increasing, as is the amount we're traveling internationally. Carbon dioxide emissions, a source of greenhouse gases, is increasing, and then the ocean is acidifying as a result. Methane, another greenhouse gas. The amount of fish we're extracting out of the ocean, the amount of nitrogen we're pumping into the ocean because of fertilizer runoff and killing those same fish, and then deforestation and biological diversity impacts through deforestation. Every one of those things is increasing, right? We're moving towards the future very quickly. I mean, you can kind of feel it, right? We're up here in the top. This is the current development. We're lunging towards the future pretty much uncontrollably, it feels sometimes, and it's causing a lot of angst. I mean, you can feel the social unrest that's resulting because of this angst. And we're heading down through this vortex, right? And we can bump into any one of these shoals, any one of these challenges, whether it's climate change or biodiversity loss or fertilizer overproduction or inequality. I mean, you can see these rocks on the horizon, and we're lunging towards them really quickly. And if we hit any one of them, really any one of these, it could disrupt civilization, and we could spin out of control. And so we've got to somehow navigate these challenges. We've got to somehow break through and get down here to sustainable development. Whatever we think sustainable development is: wealthy, prosperous, wise, better educated, healthy, tolerant. Let's use the United Nations Sustainability Goals as a potential description of what that is. Now, do you think we're going to get there? Do you think we'll be able to navigate those shoals up there? Where are they? There they are. Boom. What did you answer here in response to this question about whether humans will trigger massive cascading collapse? When I asked this of many of my colleagues and students, I find that most answer true. That they do believe that we're in serious world hurt, and it's just around the corner. And that, of course, is a declinist narrative. It's pretty common among academics, scientists generally, to have a declinist view. Particularly environmental scientists tend to have this perspective. And I want to argue for a breakthrough narrative. I want to suggest that we actually have the capacity to break through. That is, we're up here and we can navigate these. Yes, business as usual is unacceptable, unsustainable. We will not get down here to the promised land of sustainable development unless we change some things here. That we have to sacrifice a bit there. We have to change things here. We have to create new policies. We have to implement some technologies in order to move through these obstacles or diminish them. And each of these obstacles is converging somewhere around 2050. I mean, they're getting bigger and more dangerous. And past 2050, 2060, it's going to be really difficult to work our way through here, right? So we've got a lot of work to do. But that's what the breakthrough narrative helps us do. It gets people to buy in to the journey, to the effort. And I want to explain why. I'm hopeful, right? And that begins by talking about the capacity to adapt. That's the real reason why I'm hopeful. We have the capacity to adapt. First of all, there are three types of human capacity we've got a lot of evidence are increasing. The ability of people to engage in problem solving, to be the next Einstein or Steve Jobs or whomever is problem solving and creating solutions to the challenges in front of us. What was your response here to a global percentage of people who are literate? Again, if we look at most of the polls, most of the facts, and many people, will, as is evidenced in the factfulness book here by Hans Rosling, will believe that we're up here in the top, 38%, 48%. That's what most people will answer, but it's actually closer to 90%. That's the real figure, and it's increasing. It's not increasing fast enough, and there's more men who are literate than women, so it's lower for women. It's well over 90% for men, and that's got to change, of course. But we have a lot of people who can read and write, that can problem solve, engage in the middle class, if you will, and demand good governance. So here is a question about the middle class. Again, what was your answer? Most people, when I ask this question, are down here at the bottom of never or 20%, but actually never or 2100, but actually it's closer to 2020. In fact, the Brookings Institute recently came out. I'll get my head out of the way here. I'm gonna make it a pointer, I think. The Brookings Institute recently came out with this graph of the double tipping points. It happened actually in 2019 that we became wealthier more wealthy than poor. So here is the dividing line between abject poverty and middle class. So below this is sort of $11, $15 a day, and above this we start to move into the middle class. So that's sort of when you can have a refrigerator, a roof, hopefully like cement floor, not a dirt floor, a motorbike, and enough money to sustain some illness, maybe a layoff, maybe a loss of a job. It won't throw you back into abject poverty. So that's sort of middle class. And when you're in middle class, of course, you're going to demand more education for your children. You're going to demand more good governance. You're going to be a consumer that the businesses are going to listen to, and so you're going to be able to engage in problem solving. And now there are as many people that are wealthy as there are not wealthy. Okay, we've also are healthier, right? The other half of this is that more people are over 30 years old. We're living longer. We're able to problem solve longer. We're able to contribute to the economy longer. And so again, we're more than half of us are living past 30, and more of us are wealthy. So we're moving by thousands a day, hundreds, maybe thousands an hour, from poor and young to healthy and wealthy. And that's an enormous change in human capacity. All right, but that's probably not the biggest change. It might be. We're also, another reason why humans have the capacity to adapt is the ability to innovate. And our technology, of course, is increasing rapidly. Many of these things are very familiar to you. This over here on the left is a chip, a clip, a computer CPU. We know from Moore's law that that's been the capacity of computers. The hardware has been doubling every couple of years, and as a result, each doubling is a massive increase from this point on. That is, it's been doubling now for a couple decades. So the next couple doubles are going to be really significant. Major changes in computing technology, but that, of course, is not the big change. The bigger change is the software, the artificial intelligence, the machine learning, the big data, the ability to make technology a partner in discovery and innovation and monitoring the changes in the world and figuring out how to adapt and change and sustain development. So this we're starting to see with shared automated driving and other kinds of things. Huge innovations coming on the horizon, and we're starting to imagine the power that's going to have on our economy and on our discovery. The bigger unknown here, we just can't even imagine what some of these changes are going to be, is the wetware, is the genetic engineering, the genetically modified organisms, and the synthetic biology that are creating the biobricks, the basic building blocks of life, that are now able to sort of redesign how we make our energy, make our materials, make our food, improve our health. We're just now beginning to even imagine what these possibilities are. So our hardware, software, and certainly our wetware are all increasing dramatically. We are in the era of innovation. It's really quite dramatic. But here, even more exciting, and another reason why our capacity to adapt is increasing, is that capitalism is changing. I mean, dramatically, right? All those concerns back here that about obstacles, that are going to derail civilization and not allow us to make progress and sustain development. Businesses recognize this, right? Businesses are, especially big business, Fortune 500. There's never been organizations that have more power, more money, better staff, better organization, better access to the best science than current businesses, right? They know what's on the horizon better than any organization in history. They've got the capacity to address it, and they are responding in big ways, right? This gentleman on the left here is Larry Fink. He's the CEO of BlackRock Investment, one of the largest investment houses in the world. It's trillions of dollars of assets, and he's been suggesting for years now, quite vocally, to his investors and his fellow CEOs, that things have to change, that we have to respond to climate change and other sorts of challenges. I mean, it's an amazing transition. The Business Roundtable has recently converted from being admitting that it's only shareholder value, that it's a stakeholder value. That's a remarkable transition. That they've bought in. Most Fortune 500 company CEOs have bought into the Sustainable Development Goals and the Global Compact. I mean, there's a lot of energy here and innovation that's happening. Not the least of which is buy-in to the circular economy. Moving from a linear economy where we make waste, we take stuff out of the earth, we make stuff with it, and then we throw it away. If we continue with that line of economy, then we're going to run out of resources, because resources are finite. But if we can get into the circular economy where those resources come back in, and products and production systems are designed so that companies can control their supply chains, which makes them a lot of money, right? They're not going to be subject to the vagaries and the price fluctuations and of social unrest and other things caused by disruption to their supply chains, because they control their supply chains. The stuff goes back in. It's going to be dramatic. Both of these are multiple trillions of dollars of change. So we've got a lot of adaptive capacity to move from the decline to the breakthrough. I really believe that if you think about this from a leadership perspective, it's so much more powerful to say, hey, join me on the breakthrough narrative. And what are you going to do that help us avoid these challenges? How can we sacrifice now? What role can you play in making this difference? As opposed to the decline narrative, you're basically telling people, especially in the developing world, you're telling them, hey, I'm sorry, you cannot have a light bulb or a flush toilet. And maybe in the future, I won't have one. A representative of the developed world, I won't have one either, because, things are going to get really bad. And at best, we just need to turn around now and go back into some past point where we think things are better, but they're not better, because there's so many more people in poverty. There's so many people without flush toilets and light bulbs back then. There's so much less health care. You're condemning people to die because they're in poverty and they don't have access to good medicines. But the breakthrough narrative is much more powerful as a way to invite people. And I contend that we now have, right now, we've got the technology to get there. We've got the government regulations to get there. We've got the market fixes to get there. They're already out there. They're already in the world. They're just not scaled up yet, right? They're distributed through the world in small doses, and they need to be improved, and they need to be scaled up. But we've got the strategies, we've got the tools out there for this kind of system change that we need. We just need the leadership to scale them up and improve them. That's what we need. Okay. So then, Bruce, what's leadership, right? How do we get there? What do you mean by leadership? We need leadership. Well, let me ask you, the listener here, what your definition of leadership is. And I think all four of these definitions are legitimate, and I'm just curious which ones do you think best define leadership? You might want to pause here and look at these four definitions, and then continue. And I'm going to talk about each of these in some detail. And what I'm going to argue for is the middle out leadership. Excuse me. I'm going to argue for a type of leadership where we can all lead from where we are, which is the sort of that last definition. And that, in fact, that's the sort of leadership we need, because that's what's going to work for these complex, wicked system challenges that we face. But first, let me define the other two types of leadership. The first one is the top-down leadership. Those first two questions deal with the characteristics of leaders, of people in positions of authority, people who have charisma or power, elected office, the corner office, whatever it is. Let me get out of here. I don't want to be associated with those folks. These are top-down leadership, right? This is where we've got a leader that somehow gets the follower to follow. And it's what are the characteristics of that leader that make it happen. And that leader is responsible for our success and failure. That's important. We need that kind of leadership, but it's not sufficient for the challenges we face, because nobody has control over all the people, right? We're scattered through different organizations. We respond to different leaders. No one has control over us. We're scattered across different countries. Nobody has authority over all of us. So that kind of leadership will not work. The second type of leadership I want to talk about is the bottom-up leadership, and that's where we, as individuals, say, "Hey, I've had enough. Something needs to change." And as an individual, I'm going to boycott this company. I'm going to not buy its products, or I'm going to vote for a certain candidate, or I'm going to protest the treatment of other people that I think are being unfairly treated. I'm going to demand some change. And as individuals, yes, we absolutely need that type of leadership. It's critical and essential. And I encourage you to participate in that type of leadership, but it's not enough. Right? It's not enough, because acting individually is insufficient. Right? We need another definition of leadership, which is this last one, the middle out leadership, which is where each of us contribute. We look at the group and what it's going to take to make that group have impact. And this middle out leadership is focused on whatever it takes to get the group have leadership. So anytime, any place, anywhere a group has gotten leadership done, they've gotten direction, alignment, commitment. They've been able to figure out what direction they're going, be able to figure out who's going to do what, and they've been able to figure out that they're committed, that they got buy-in. And so how do we get those types of leadership? Whether it's a tug of war group, whether it's a scientific peer group of doing a project, whether it's a student group working on a class project, whether it's an organization, a nation, of the world, we've got to have direction, alignment, and commitment, right? We've got to be able to know where we're going, who's doing what, and are we committed? This is a very powerful diagnostic tool. It's a very powerful way of thinking about leadership generally, because we can all contribute to helping the group get direction, alignment, commitment. We can all ask, do we have direction? Well, if not, what are some strategies that help us get direction? Do we know where we're going? Do we all have alignment? Are some of the tasks not being done because they're mundane or they're too risky? And okay, well, what are strategies we can use to get those tasks identified and done? And are we committed? Are people dragging their feet and don't have buy-in? If so, what can we do? There's lots of examples of this type of leadership from the middle out. Just recently, my university, Virginia Tech, committed to climate neutrality with a climate commitment. Great, this is fabulous. But in order to get this done, it's going to require so much more than just what the university can do by itself, just what the president of the university and the hierarchy can say, hey, get this done, right? Because there's supply chains, there's food coming in, there are commuters coming in, there's energy coming in from the grid. We know the president of my university does not have control over all those things, so we've got to have some kind of middle out leadership. Think of a farmer's market as another example, where the farmers figure out a way to coordinate and collaborate with the consumers and the town and the musicians and the buskers that make it interesting and the police that organize the traffic. All these things have to come together. Nobody has authority over all these people, right? But somehow they're coordinated. It's the type of leadership that gets it done in a way that people think will improve the food supply in the region. The example I want to spend a little bit more time on here, and I'm going to give you a couple big examples in a few minutes, are these round tables. Round tables for responsible soy. There's some similar thing for palm oil, livestock, cotton, fashion. And there's lots of these roundtables out there that are incredibly powerful, great examples of this middle out leadership. In this case, soybeans, which are in just about everything we eat, right? Oil, tofu, all kinds of things, as well as a major feedstock for much of the meat that we eat, are produced around the world, particularly in South America and the U.S. And in South America, there's a lot of deforestation that's occurring in order to clear the forest to create places to graze livestock and grow soybeans. And it's a major problem because we don't want any more deforestation because of climate change sorts of issues and biodiversity. So the roundtable got together and with a couple of the big aggregators, Cargill and Bunge, major international Fortune 500 type companies, buyers of all these and traders of all these commodities, got together with some of the end buyers like McDonald's, some major NGOs, environmental NGOs like the Nature Conservancy, World Wildlife Fund, Greenpeace, some farmers in Brazil, some local officials, and you say, okay, what can we do? What standards can we set that will have an impact? And they came up with what they call the soy moratorium, which is a refusal to buy and trade soybeans that were not grown on forests that could be proven to be deforestation free. So let me say the opposite is that if your land was recently deforested, we're not going to buy your soybeans. And the impact was dramatic in terms of decreasing the amount of deforestation. And so it's an example of how this middle out leadership, no one has control over all these actors, but they figured out a way to collaborate. There were leadership strategies that got them to collaborate. And we can unpack that in a great deal more detail. And I will in other examples. But I want to explain sort of why I'm making this pitch, in part because I just published a book on this topic, right? And I've been talking about it in these podcasts. There are so many strategies we can use, and many of them are covered in the book, that help people connect that otherwise, sometimes won't meet, don't even know they're connected, that no one has authority over all those people in the case of the roundtable. What are some strategies that make that happen? How do we collaborate across the differences that are out there? I mean, the polarization in politics is so high now. We need new strategies to collaborate across difference. Plus, the people are in different organizations and even different nations. They have different agendas, different values. And so how do we collaborate across these differences? There's a lot of strategies that help you do that. And finally, things are changing so fast, and there's such amazing uncertainty, confounding uncertainty, that we need to figure out how to fail forward, because we're going to fail, right? We need to figure out how to learn by doing. We need how to figure out how to be resilient in the face of failure. That's make sense of all the uncertainty out there. We need tools for that, and there are many available. Let me just give you two kind of interesting examples that we profile in the book. One is agriculture, and the other is climate. Agriculture. If you're concerned about biodiversity, you're concerned about climate, you should be concerned about agriculture. So we hammer the world right now, extracting our food system. It's sort of the biggest impact humans have on the biosphere is agriculture. And if you look at it this way, if you take all the land that is currently under production, we farm it, we graze it, it's equivalent to sort of South America and Africa, right? That's the land. The rest of the arable land is either forested or it's rocks and ice, and we can't farm it. And so that's a lot of land. Half of that is used for beef production or meat production. So half of it, right? That's a lot of biodiversity. That's a lot of carbon emissions. So the overall emissions for greenhouse gases attributed to agriculture is somewhere around over 25%, maybe over 30%. I mean, it's an amazing emitter. The soil carbon is the largest terrestrial sink of carbon in the world, and second really only to the ocean in the atmosphere. So when you plow and you release all that emissions, cattle, if they were a nation, beef cattle, if they were a nation, they would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases behind China and the US. That's an enormous change. So if we can just change a little bit of the meat that people eat, we can reduce it some, we can have huge impacts on biodiversity and climate change. But how do you change people's eating habits, right? There's no top-down person is going to say, hey, stop eating your hamburgers, right? Donald Trump, Margaret Thatcher, Nelson Mandela, even Joe Biden is not going to be able to tell you to stop eating burgers. Some of you may respond to a plea like that, but most of you will reject it, especially across the world, right? Nobody's going to respond to one. Nobody has that power. Likewise, from the bottom up, I can talk to you until I'm blue in the face about these environmental impacts. Did you know that agriculture uses 70% of the world's water, and we're becoming water stressed as a world? And so we really need to worry about our food system, and meat is one of the heaviest users of water. I can give you those facts all day long until I'm blue in the face. It's not going to change many people's behavior. It just doesn't. And so somehow we have to change the whole system. And look at all these actors here. I want to point to them. There they are. How do we coordinate them? There are not just the consumers, but there's the chefs, there's the restaurateurs, there's the people that make and sell the food, there's the farmers. It's an incredibly complicated food system. Nobody has control over all those people. So here's a really cool solution put forward by a group called Changing Tastes. Also the Menus of Change, and others are working on this. It's called the Plant Forward movement, and I really think it's one of the more exciting developments in sustainable development for the last couple decades, where the Plant Forward movement tries to put plant-based proteins at the center of the plate rather than meat-based proteins, and move the meat-based proteins off to the side of the plate. How do we do that? Well, they've recruited celebrity chefs. They've used what we call identity management to recruit a few celebrity chefs and get them to buy into this. And of course, they're very competitive and they want to be different from other chefs. And so this Plant Forward movement is a way to distinguish them. And because they're cool, because they're celebrities, because they're at the top of the hierarchy, of the status hierarchy, other chefs want to be like them, as do foodies. So they start adopting the Plant Forward movement. And suddenly recipes change, menus change, restaurants change, even further down the supermarkets change, and the big producers of prepared food start to change because they want to be associated with this cool in group. And the whole food system changes. And in the US, the amount of beef has declined as a result of movements like this. It's really dramatic. And the people aren't doing it because they're saying, hey, I'm worried about water use or carbon emissions or biodiversity issues. They're doing it because they want to be cool. They want to be in the in group, right? That's a very powerful leadership strategy, along with choice set editing is a part of this story that we'll talk about at some other time. And it's described in the book. So that's one example of a very powerful leadership strategy. Here's another associated with urbanization. Cities emit most of the greenhouse gases, 70-80% or something like that, which is not surprising because cities are where most people live and cities are where most wealth is. So that's where most consumers buy stuff, and all the production system produces carbon emissions, and most of the buildings are, and all the concrete and steel and all the heat and energy and air. So it's not surprising. So if we can change the way cities emit greenhouse gases, we can have a huge impact. Now, I'm not in any way slamming cities or urbanization. I actually am a big advocate from a sustainable development perspective. Urbanization is one of the biggest levers we can pull to have impacts on sustainable development. It drives down poverty, it increases equity and access to all kinds of things, including healthcare and civil rights. It also reduces transportation costs and need because buildings are stacked. There's less materials, there's less energy use, and certainly there's less land, so there's less biodiversity impact. So urbanization done well is one of the best things we can do for sustainable development, but we've got to do it well. And here's an example. This is Arlington, Virginia, which is just inside the beltway of Washington, D.C., right next to Washington, D.C. And this building here is actually where I teach sometimes. And buildings in Arlington use 40 to 60% of the total energy of Arlington. I mean, that's a massive amount of energy, right? Because it mostly goes in heating and air conditioning, electricity, massive amount. So we need to change the buildings within cities. But here's the transportation system and the building density. You can see there's a metro, there's an underground subway that runs right down the middle here. And that's where the buildings are clustered. That's because of smart growth, because of zoning that has forced it so people can walk and to work. They can shop and eat and play and work without needing much of private transportation. There's a lot of last mile transportation, bikes and scooters and buses that bring people into there. So the transportation system can be very efficient. Now here's what's exciting. Here is the community energy plan, which Arlington passed almost a decade ago now, that promotes going to carbon neutral, the city being carbon neutral. Now, earlier I said, my campus, my college campus is going to do this, and that's a really great thing, and more campuses should do that. But here's a city. I mean, if we can have cities go carbon neutral, then we're going to change things, right? We're going to change climate. But just think how difficult a task this is, because it's not just the buildings which are so important. And I'm going to come back and give you a specific example about the buildings, but we've got to affect the energy system that's coming in. What's the source of that energy that's coming in through the utilities to our community? They've got to affect the transportation system, right? It's got to electrify the cars. We got to make it more walkable. We've got to do all kinds of transportation systems. The facilities that are owned by the public, by the government, of course, they have to lead by example, but so do all the private facilities and buildings and transportation fleets have to change. And then certainly residents have to change. The people who are consuming electricity with light bulbs or hot showers or whatever, we need to have green games. I need to be able to work on my phone and say, hey, this week I use less greenhouse gases than you in the greenhouse gas committee competition, and therefore you got to buy me a beer this week, right? So we have some kind of competition. All these things are in play, right? It's amazing amount of different actors that are being coordinated, and they're using a process called collective impact to make this happen. And let me just give you an example: the buildings, right? So they've got a green building incentive program. That buildings make more money for the developer when there's higher density, right? They have more floor space, more stuff to sell, and cities have ability to regulate how much floor space, how much density you have per lot. And so what Arlington has done is incentivized developers to make their buildings green, make them energy neutral. I mean, we can make buildings actually give energy back to the grid now. There's such amazing technology, but it's a difficult ask for a developer who's pricing and thinking about sales and what residents or tenants and buyers want. And one of the big challenges for a developer is convincing the financiers, right? How do you get the finance people on board? Because finance people tend to be very conservative. They only want to finance what's worked in the past. And there are some, but there aren't a whole lot of these green buildings. And so the town has to work with finance. The developers have to work with finance. Likewise, the developers have to work with the architects. The architects are really keen to do this, or LEED and other kinds of certification systems that help, but the construction industry, isn't used to doing this, so they have to be brought on board. And then the next owner, because the developer will often sell the unit to somebody else, they have to buy into this. And then the manager of the building, who's controlling the energy system, has to buy into this. Of course, the tenants do have to. So there's all these people have to be coordinated in some way. And the Green Building Incentive Program uses collective impact and other ways to coordinate. They have clear measurement goals, clear communication, clear directional alignment commitment to build the consensus and get this done. It's a really fabulous example. And Arlington is at the forefront, but there are many communities working on the same thing. So there are two examples, right? That one in agriculture and one in climate, about how this middle out leadership work. Okay, let me conclude quickly. I've been arguing that we live at the time of the great acceleration. You can feel things accelerating. You can feel us getting pulled into the vortex, a headlong rush into the future. And it's disturbing because we can see challenges in front of us like climate change, which are incredibly disruptive, or at least have the potential to disrupt civilization as we know it. But I've also been arguing that we can respond in ways, we can adapt in ways, that we've got the tools, we've got the strategies, we've got the technology, the government policies that are out there. We just have to scale them up. And that's just going to take leadership, which requires, among other things, a story that engages people in the journey, in the practice, in making the future something where we want to live. It's not discouraging people, but engaging them, inviting them to participate. And then with leadership, we can make systems change, and we can move into whatever future we want to create. Whether that's this Jetsons like Nirvana with flying cars and people walking their dogs around floating homes, whatever it is, sustainable development goals, we can achieve it if we work together, if we collaborate, if we practice systems leadership. What we need is leadership, a good story, and hope. Thank you.